Hello and welcome to another refreshing episode of Secrets of a B2B Marketer. You've heard some wide variety of speakers so far. You've heard a lawyer, you've heard a marketer talk about it, and today I have a communications expert on our show. Please join me as I welcome Miss Melissa Serrao. Melissa is the communications head at Baxi. Welcome to the show, Melissa.
Thanks for having me, Benita. Really stoked to be here.
I'm very stoked to have you on the show too, because I look at your profile and I'm super impressed. You have 18, 19 years of working experience. You worked on the PR side. I suppose that was for about 8 years. And then you went on to join Notice as a communications lead. And you're currently heading communications at Baxi. So that's a fabulous career that you have. And I think one thing that seems to tie in all of this is your communications. So if I may jump right into it, I would love to ask you, what's the biggest challenge in B2B communications that you have, Melissa?
I've worked with quite a few B2B brands, both on the PR side, and then of course there was Otis, which is a B2B brand largely, and now Baxi as well. One of the biggest things that I've found, Benita, is with B2B brands is the risk of becoming generic. So a lot of B2B brands are very afraid of communicating. Either it's because they don't know how to, or they are worried about how competition might perceive this information and what might follow afterwards. But the point here is that if we don't communicate, if a B2B brand does not communicate, they fail to distinguish themselves from the clutter or from the industry. And how that translates on ground is that they end up selling only on the basis of price. So whatever work you've done to add any value over your competition is completely diluted. So I think that's one of the larger risks. So keeping this in mind, I feel B2B brands need to kind of take a step back. They need to look at things from a wider perspective and ask themselves, where do I fall as part of a larger narrative? Like say, for example, at Otis, we were not just an elevator company that moves boxes up and down a building. It's more about we're driving urbanization, we're mobilizing cities. At Baxi, it's not about moving boxes from point A to point B. It's about driving the Indian consumption story. It's about fulfilling people's aspirations. And what then ends up happening over a point of time, if you look at yourself through this lens, is that you will see that there's less, you move from consumer push to consumer pull. So that's one of the big things that I've seen working with B2B brands.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, as you said this, I thought of the Intel story where, again, one knows an Intel. I'm not going to go out in the market and buy an Intel chip, but I do buy a laptop that has an Intel chip compared to another competitor brand. And that's because Intel has put in that kind of an effort in not becoming generic. They've kind of created a larger narrative, just like you suggest. And I think that's a brilliant thing that you've been doing.
Yeah.
I believe that you, in the PR field also, you've had some experience that you were sharing with me. I would love for our audience to get to listen to that as well.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you mentioned the Intel case, because it was all about branding the name. But then there have been cases where the brand or the product doesn't come to the fore, but it's all about category expansion. There was something very interesting that I did when I was on the PR side of things. I worked with a multinational pharma company, and we were tasked to sell their immunosuppressive drug, especially in the cases of when you're receiving a donation, like a liver or a kidney, etc. The mandate is to, get people aware about cadaver donation, getting people to donate their organs or donate the organs of their loved ones who have moved on. So what we did is that we worked with a lot of NGOs that work in this space, and we seeded this concept via the media and also various religious institutes. What ended up,
Interesting.
yep, it was a very interesting program. Very grateful to have been part of this program. What ended up happening is that, over a period of time, this is something that lies in the conscious of the media today, and also has kind of gotten policymakers to wake up to this idea of organ donation. So this was a very interesting program, and it kind of speaks about category expansion.
Actually, it's a very bright idea, again, ties into your talk about the larger narrative, because it makes sense, and I think you come across, when you do something like this, you also come across as an organization that cares for beyond your P&L statements.
Absolutely.
That's a brilliant thing.
Absolutely.
But it certainly makes me wonder, okay, and it's just a thought that came to my mind. Did the employees, or particularly the leaders, then commit to organ donation? Because that's the starting point, right? I mean, it's one thing for you to go out and tell the whole wide world how to act, but did it have any internal impact? Or did the communication actually come from the leaders, not just in the words, but in action?
So, Benita, we were really tasked with the PR and external communications mandate. So I can't really throw light on this program in terms of leadership communication or internal communications. But to your point, leadership communication is super important, even in a B2B organization. The premise is that today we live in a trust deficit society, right? So when you have a face to the company, it just automatically lends credibility. And really, if you want your communications program to succeed, you need to have leadership committed to making this work. So when I joined Otis India, it was a new management team, but they straight off the bat realized that communications was essential. So what we did is that we leveraged media, internal communications, events and forums, and eventually social to basically put out our voice there into the market. Over time, with consistent efforts, what ended up happening, one of the good things that ended up happening was that the president of the company became the de facto spokesperson and was asked to be the voice or the head of the industry body, the only industry body, elevator body. Yeah. And they extended his period beyond the regular 2-3 years. I think what happened for us and what I've seen happens for companies who adopt communications is that it builds cushion for tough times ahead. Everybody goes through tough times, right? But you can't suddenly, okay, hey, I'm going through a crisis, so I'm going to have my leader front the media and have a conversation. Why should anybody believe you? Why would anybody want to hear your story when you've suddenly decided to show up and kind of offer your narrative? That is one piece. And the other thing is that, when you're communicating in the outside space, especially social, you end up happening to have a ear to the ground. And that's very important when you're crafting your strategy, right, for the future. So leadership is super important in my opinion. Commitment to leadership communication.
So when you say social, my ears all automatically perk up, okay? Because as you know, social media is the domain, particularly social media for B2B companies, is the domain Vanilla Skills specializes in. And when it comes to leadership communication for the top management, that's my personal niche. It's my favorite. And when you spoke about how, the leader became the de facto spokesperson and went on to head the industry body, that was very exciting for me, because we've managed to achieve something similar by helping the CEO of an organization to become a leader of an industry body. And what happened was this leader is somebody who's absolutely adored by his people, okay? And he's somebody where, people would go out of the way to do things for him. I remember one of the employees resigned because he'd moved on to a better paying job or whatever. And his last message to me was, Benita, if you ever need something for this gentleman, I can't name them, of course, on the show. But he said, if you ever need anything done for this gentleman, I will do it. You don't even need to tell him that I did it. I just owe him everything. So just reach out to me and I will do it. This gentleman used to make videos for the CEO, for the MD when there was a need. So, we went on to talk about how this person, through his posts, became such a cherished leader, not just within the company, but also outside. And then another example to your point of social listening was because I manage, again, multiple CEOs accounts. So this was a CEO of an IT company who had joined the organization very recently. They had been in for a few months. And one of the jobs we do is we filter out all the connection requests that we get on the CEO's account, right? So as I was going through it, I saw one profile, which was a very senior employee in the company. We'd even made posts about that employee, so part of the leadership team. And we noticed that, you see how LinkedIn has that open for work frame on the DP? The label. Frame was on. And I saw that and I sent that screenshot to the CEO and said, this to me is a red flag. This gentleman looks like he's looking out for jobs, and I know for a fact that he's precious to the team. So the CEO took that and immediately arranged a meeting with the employee in question. And I do not know the finer details of the interaction, but I know for a fact that 8 months in, that employee is still a part of the company, and they were able to resolve, and that open to work frame is gone. So the social listening that you're talking about.
Social media saved the day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very relevant point. I think internal communications was a huge piece of what we did at Otis as well. And we found that the leader became very revered. It still continued to be very revered. The leadership team is very revered at Otis. The other thing is that, just speaking a little bit more about internal communications, like any other company, you go through so many changes, right? Similarly, Otis India went through a lot of changes, including COVID and digitalization, right? Here is this, the oldest elevator company in the world, suddenly pivoting towards digitalization, right?
Yeah.
I think what happened is that through steady internal communications is that it allows you to control the employee narrative, and you're not just leaving it to the employee to make what they will of it.
Absolutely.
Like, say, for example, with digitalization, we did a lot of work in that space. I worked extensively with the team. So for the new sales team, we introduced CRM. For the maintenance team, for the team on ground, it was all about service digitalization. That meant taking your checklists and your toolbox and actually putting it onto an iPhone. And then for customers, selling elevators online, right?
Yeah.
What we did is that we started talking about how the future is digital, how do we posture ourselves for what is coming. But also, Benita, what we did is that we were sensitive to employees' apprehensions. So we tied that into culture too. Like, say, for example, when you talk about digitalization, you're immediately saying, okay, what about my job? Everybody has misconceptions and fears. So what we did is that we spoke about people first, right? How training is required and what we can do to support training. We spoke about collaboration because, again, here is an old organization. So you have a lot of experienced employees, but how do you get them to collaborate with the new kids on the block who are well versed in technology? So super important. Communications on the inside is super important to get everybody aligned to the new culture, to the new vision, to the new way of doing things. So yeah, that was a really interesting experience, and it's led me to believe that internal communications is as important as external communications, because I do feel that a lot of communicators feel external communications is far more sexier than internal communications.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And here's the thing, internal communications need not necessarily always happen in a closed door internal loop only, because there are two aspects of internal communication that I feel sometimes get overshadowed. One is there are potential employees out there, right, who are reading the posts that you put up. And then they
Absolutely.
are going to come in and become a part of your system. So you can start this internal communication process right from the get-go, or even before the get-go, right? That's how you bring them in. So that's one aspect that I think gets missed. And the second is, I hope I'm wrong on this, but a lot of people don't read the internal communication emails that come out, but they do read the social media post. So sometimes, if there's an email saying there is a communications training or a people first training that's going to happen, people will entirely miss the communication. But if you put it up on the social media, they're more likely to, or it becomes a plus one. I'm not saying it's an either or, but it certainly becomes one more layer of, or one more way of reaching out to your internal stakeholders as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because see, an employee is not just an employee, right? They're also consumers.
Correct.
Also consumers of your products or your services. They're consumers of social media as well.
And your content.
So your audience lives on different forums for different reasons. So you need to kind of make sure that you're catching them at all these points, right? You're increasing your opportunity to see, so to speak.
Exactly. And like you said, consumers, I think the internal stakeholders can be not just the biggest champions for the company, but also one of the key consumers of the content you create.
Absolutely.
But one of the things that I know you love to talk about is jargons, and that's my big pain point too. I know for a fact that there are clients out there, they simply love their acronyms. What is your thought about it?
Oh, it's one of the other bigger challenges of B2B communications.
Right.
They love their jargon, they love their technical lingo, they love their acronyms, but I think where it is a badge of honor, and rightly so, right? Because they kind of feel a sense of community, I guess.
Yes.
But what happens, Benita, with that is that you tend to kind of lose out because some people may not get that jargon, may not get that.
Exactly.
And you can't assume that all your customers are going to get it.
Yep.
What happens is that you end up losing somebody's attention and mind space, and then they're kind of thrown out of the mix. So what needs to happen is that B2B needs to demystify the concepts. They need to make their content relatable. Humanize their content. One of the brands that I closely follow is Caterpillar, right? The manufacturers of earth moving machines and things like that.
Right.
They're very interesting in how they kind of communicate. If you look at their social media pages, like say for example, there is this one video that they put out where they use their cranes to kind of move blocks, and it resembles Jenga. When you play Jenga, when kids play Jenga. So you're kind of reviving old memories and you're kind of making it relatable. Wow. It's super interesting. So, and there are a lot of brands who are now following suit, but not enough. So the runway to do more good work in B2B still exists, which is good news for you and me, right?
Absolutely. Oh yes, absolutely. By the way, I don't follow Caterpillar, but just because you've recommended it, I'm going to go follow them. It definitely sounds like an interesting account. So I'm definitely going to look it up and follow them. But I think one of the things that I would certainly feel is we learn a lot from watching others, but we learn the most from our own experiences. And there is always this one experience, one incident that teaches us way more than any other incident does. In my case, it was the time when I actually ran off the stage. It's actually a true story that I've spoken about in my first episode.
Yes.
And from there to talking not just at a TEDx, but also being invited by Harvard and now hosting the show, it's been a journey for me, right? So that one incident was a big game changer in my life. So like that, do you have an incident, something that was hands-on experience for you?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of them there are many, but I will speak about customer complaints, because that is again another area that B2B brands struggle with. When you have a complaint, I see a lot of B2B brands kind of wishing it away or putting their heads in the ground and,
Yeah, ostrich syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Otis India, we quickly learned how to deal with customer complaints. But that was not always the case, because when we started out, generally the way we responded was more on the defensive and trying to tell them what we're doing on ground and defending our decisions, etc., etc. But we quickly found out that customers were really not interested. And what also ended up happening is that you have this long chain of justification out in the open for the world to see, right?
Yeah.
So we had to quickly learn to pivot and focus our energies on, getting the customer to understand that we have your back, and focusing really on supporting the operations team to really fix the issue on ground.
Yeah.
What happened with this approach is that you took the conversation offline, you spoke to the customer one-on-one, making it far more personal, and you resolve the situation on ground, because that is where the that is where the battle is taking place, right?
Yeah.
So this was a big thing that I still carry with me as we kind of navigate the world of customer complaints.
I think that's a brilliant thing, because one of the platforms that I experience is that Twitter's become this complaint ground, right? And it's the place where I go to and complain about my network. It's the place where I go and talk about how poor the customer service is. And slowly, at least the larger B2C companies, including airlines and the telecom sector, have become far more active on Twitter. They are socially listening, they are responding, not reacting, but actually responding, taking the conversation offline. And I wonder if B2B companies are ready to move to that front. One of the things I see that they do is that they jump to the CEO's account and they tag the CEO and they start to complain. And that kind of becomes, it falls upon the CEO. Well, the good news is it gets resolved for a lot of people, but that's really not how it ought to be. And so if the companies don't want this pressure falling on the CEO's office, then the way to go about it would certainly be to do a little more social listening and a little more, like you said, ear to the ground, and making sure that you're actually responding to a customer's complaint instead of getting defensive or reacting. In fact, a similar thing I think is also applicable in context of employee grievances. Glassdoor is usually where employees go and complain. Mouthshut is another such platform. And in my experience, it is possible to change those ratings. We have successfully helped a company change their ratings, go from 2.4, abysmal, all the way up to 4.1. It went to 4.3 and then it kind of tapered off and went back to 4.1, which is now stable for a while at a 4.1. So again, ends up being a ear to the ground kind of a thing. And thank you for sharing this, because my belief is that these experiences teach us, and I would love to absorb all your learnings.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think, Twitter, B2B companies need to look at it as an opportunity to actually have the customer vent, and then an opportunity to resolve their problems. Because if you don't allow for them to vent, it might fester into something else that you don't have control over. So I think it's an opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. It is certainly an opportunity. In fact, I tell my team too, be grateful that the customer is complaining, because it means they still care.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, they'll simply drop you and go somewhere else, right? So
absolutely,
the fact that they are complaining means they still care. They still want to change and
want to make it work.
Still, yeah.
Yep. Absolutely right.
So thank you for sharing this. I think we're reaching towards the tail end of our conversation, and I'm going to ask you my favorite question, something that the whole show is named after. What is your one secret to success as a B2B marketer?
Well, it's no secret, Benita, and then there are many things that help anybody become successful. But I think the one thing that I would allude to is collaboration. I've learned over time that collaboration is very, very important, especially if you're in the communication space. Because, hey, listen, communications does not exist in a vacuum, right?
Right.
You need to go to people to get their stories, right? Whether it's the engineers, whether it's the operations team, whether it's the marketing team, and you need to get them to share their story. But they will only share their story if you have built some sort of a bond, rapport, trust with them, right?
Yeah.
But that again takes patience, it takes time. But I've time and time again found that collaboration helps immensely. It helps you kind of go the distance when it comes to communications, in my opinion. So, yeah.
I agree. No, absolutely. In fact, as you were saying this, I was thinking all of this, they all tie in beautifully to communication, as whether it is your trust, whether it is your story, whether it is your collaboration, it all kind of amalgamates into how well did you communicate. Because if you're not going to communicate well, whether it is internally or externally, whether it is on social media or with the traditional media, it's all going to kind of fall down like a house of cards, right? And so I think you've really shared some brilliant insights today. I loved your thought about the risk of becoming generic, because most B2B companies are failing to see the criticality of this. They hold their cards so close to the chest that they forget
Absolutely.
that then you're not going to be visible. And you're right, they end up being price competitive when they need not be. So that was a beautiful thought that you shared with us. Thank you so much. I would quickly want to ask you, towards the end of this, I want to do a quick rapid fire with you.
Okay.
I promise you I'm not asking you to reveal secrets through this rapid fire. So the first word or the first thought that comes to your mind when I say conflict?
Patience.
Yeah.
You need to have a lot of patience to resolve a conflict. And that also means that you can't be reactive. So you have to have a lot of patience. You have to listen. Don't react, respond.
Yeah. Okay, good point. The second one, leaders.
Very important when it comes to communications. Like I said before, you want your communications to succeed, you need to have your leader believe that it's, invest time and believe that it will work.
True that. Budgets.
It's a good thing. I think budgets are a good thing, whether it's, now this less or more is relative, but it's good because then you kind of monitor your success against it. So I'm always happy to work with the budget. I'm a big fan of processes as well.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's a good one. This is rare because most people say, oh, budgets, you have to fight about them. Budgets bring us, I think, stress in people. And I was happy to hear that for you, it wasn't stressful.
No, I think it gives you an opportunity to dialogue with the folks at finance and kind of get them to believe in the program as well. So I think, I enjoy it.
Okay, lovely.
Those discussions.
Lovely. Challenges.
Love it. I think that's why I kind of moved to a different industry recently. I needed to test myself in new waters, see whatever I've learned over the last couple of years. Does it still hold good in today's environment? And I hope to kind of take that into my late 60s as well.
Awesome. And on that note, if this were a competition, you would certainly win the hamper.
Yay!
But no, seriously, I don't think I realized how quickly the last 30 minutes went by. And it was a very, very insightful conversation. I loved every minute of it. So thank you for being on the show, Melissa.
Thank you for having me. This has been an absolute delight.
We do ask our guests if they could nominate somebody for the future shows. So do you have someone in mind who you could nominate for future shows?
I do.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to take the person's name, but
Okay.
this is someone that I rely on very closely for advice in the communication space, in the marketing space. And this person I've worked with at multiple firms together, including my first job.
No, I completely respect where you're coming from. And while we would love to have good people on the show, I will reach out to you personally and get the credentials, because this sounds like a very interesting person. Some in this world where people are not loyal to each other, both of you've worked together for a very, very long time, and certainly something I respect. So I will reach out to you to get more details.
Sounds good.
Yeah. I wanted to also take this opportunity to thank you tremendously for being on our show. It was extremely insightful, and I'm sure our audience will get really, really good insights out of this show. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Benita. Really appreciate you having me, and I've loved every one of your episodes. I've heard them. So,
Oh, that's so sweet.
And all the best to the show. Right.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you saying that.